you can write for an hour a day for 30 days, and let's say you write 1,000 words in that hour, well, that's 30,000 words. It's most of the length of a book. And so we've just seen from coaching a ton of people through this process that is the demarcation line for people, where if they don't get their rough draft finished, they give up. And if they do get their rough draft finished, they end up publishing.
Welcome back to the show. I'm your host, Remington Ramsey, and today we have author and speaker, investor, CEO of selfpublishing.com. And buckle up because this bio is long. A Forbes 30 Under 30 honoree, author of 7 best-selling books, including his most recent book titled Publish, which I just finished. I'm a big fan. Selfpublishing.com is an Inc. 5000 company that the last 4 years in a row has one of the 5,000 fastest growing private companies in the U.S. Chandler is also the host of 7 Figure Principles podcast and the Self-Publishing School podcast. I don't know how you have time to do all this, Chandler. And through his books, podcasts, YouTube channels, and selfpublishing.com, he's helped thousands of people write a book that grows their impact, income, and business. And you just told me it's about 2 to 7 books a day, which is just incredible. Welcome to the show, Chandler.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You know what's funny about podcasts is after an intro like that, you expect to hear cheering, and there's no cheering. It's just people driving and yelling at their kids in the back seat. Oh, there we go. Next level. Now we're talking. I got to get that feature, man. We just had a whole thing on AI. I should have been ready. That's great. Well, Chandler, let's start with you, man. How did you get into this business of self-publishing?
Yeah, unlikely, in an unlikely way. I'm a college dropout and a C-level English student with ADHD. So I didn't really like reading or writing growing up. But when I decided to drop out of school, I'd ran some businesses successfully in the past. And I felt like I had friends that wanted to learn how to run a business. They were entrepreneurs wanting to be entrepreneurs. And I felt like I needed to teach some of the things that I learned. And so a book just felt like a mechanism that made sense. And it didn't start out as a book. It started out as a PDF. And then that PDF evolved into a book, which I think was kind of nice because there was low expectations. Right. And so I did that and wrote and published the book. And then that book did well, and then did another book, and that book did pretty well. And then people just started asking like, hey, how are you doing this? And so that's when I started what now is selfpublishing.com. And we've been, published about 7,000 books in the last 9 years or so.
Well, it's a common theme of late. We've had a lot of realtors turned author and speaker and writing their own books, and had Justin Donald recently on of The Lifestyle Investor, and probably a lot of people that we've come across that, there you go. That's have you read it?
It's on my shelf. Yeah, I've read it multiple times. It's a great book.
It's a great book, man. He mentored me for a while. And what I love about Justin is he literally lives what he wrote. Like, it's not like, hey, these are some good ideas. He did it. But you're similar in that fact, because I just got done reading your book. And one of the coolest things that I think, like, whenever you read a book, a business book, what I like is like 1 or 2 takeaways immediately that you can apply. One of yours that I was like, you know what? I'm going to stop just reading books about good ideas. I'm actually going to do it, was your 30-day writing challenge. So in your book, you talk about, and the cool thing is there's not a lot of rules around it, at least not when I read. Yeah. You just write for 30 days straight. And man, let me tell you, that was actually difficult because during the time I was writing, Thanksgiving happened, right? I think Halloween happened. There was weekends, there was church, there was different schedules every single day. And I had to commit. And there was days, I kid you not, there was days during this 30-day challenge where I was already in bed and I was like, shoot, I wanted to say I did it for all 30 days. And so I would literally get up and write. And some of those days where I didn't plan on it or didn't want to was some of my best content. It just happened, just flowed. So what did you actually do the 30-day challenge? You're like, hey, this is a good idea. We should put this in the book, or like, how did that come about?
Yeah, kind of. I'm forgetting the exact timeline, but when I did the second edition of my book published, I want to say it was right in the 30-day range that it took me to write the draft. And it just felt intuitive. I mean, really why I designed the 30-day rough draft challenge is because there's some people who want to sprint and there's some people who want to do the slow and steady. And that felt like a good middle ground She's like, all right, if you can write for an hour a day for 30 days, and let's say you write 1,000 words in that hour, well, that's 30,000 words. And so that's most of the length of a book. And so we've just seen from coaching a ton of people through this process that is the demarcation line for people, where if they don't get their rough draft finished, they give up. And if they do get their rough draft finished, they end up publishing. So it's just, people start to see the light at the end of the tunnel when they get that draft done. And so that was the thought behind it, is, hey, how can we create a challenge where people will make significant progress in a short period of time so that they start to believe that it's possible?
Well, what's fascinating is we started this conversation around why it makes sense to even have you on the podcast. And the reason is because most realtors that I come across have a story worth sharing. Most people have a story worth sharing. We had Michael Mayer on, and he said everyone should write a book, if not just for their kids, memoirs.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So, but taking that a step further, we're knowing that we're going to the top 1% of realtors across the nation. These guys have done and seen some things. They've done some incredible things. And a lot of them have been on the show talking about their book. Take me through your statement. You should write a book to grow your business.
Yeah. I think, I've seen it firsthand. A book is one of the best things that you can do to grow your business. My books have generated millions of dollars in sales for selfpublishing.com. It is the engine that feeds everything. So when I'll go out and speak, we'll give away copies of my book. And that's how we turn speaking gigs into $30,000 to $150,000 speaking gigs versus just getting paid a speaking fee, right? Because we give the book away, people book a session with my team, they sign up to work with us, right? And so as a realtor specifically, I guess I'll zoom out. I'll go growing your business as a whole, and then I'll go realtor specific. But business as a whole, I look at how do you use the book to get more leads, sales, and referrals for your business. So leads, sales, referrals. So leads, these are people who hear about you because of your book. So there's a bunch of people who have never heard of selfpublishing.com, but kind of like you were saying, you decided, hey, I'm working on a book, and then somebody recommended my book. And then next thing you know, now you know about the business, right? And it's like, hey, maybe we should work together. And so that's an example of getting a lead from your book. Then more sales, that's more of the people who already know about you, turning them into paying customers. And then more referrals, that's turning, customers or prospects into active referrers. And so, a lot of people say a book is the new business card. I think a book is better than a business card, because if I give you a business card, you're probably going to throw it away immediately or within 24 hours. But if I give you a book, you're going to keep it. Most likely it's in your office or it's in your home. And every time you see that book, you think of me. And so when I think of like realtor specific, I'll just kind of go quickly through this, because I told you my mom's a realtor. And so I've been hounding her for years, like, hey, you got to write a book. And I'm like, here's what I would do. There's two easy angles. There's the first time home buyer's guide to buying a home, because she worked with a lot of first time home buyers. She also,
so let me ask you something. Let me pause you for a second. Mm-hmm. And I've argued with, I want to get your take on this. That's been written a million times. Why should she write it from her perspective?
Because you can get it in the mind of the prospect that are actually thinking about working with you. And so maybe you localize it. Maybe you go a totally different angle and say the 10 things you need to know before purchasing a home in Indianapolis or whatever the city is, right? And so now this is local to that market, right? And now, sure, a lot of the advice might be agnostic to the market, but it feels specific. And so now, if I'm a home buyer in that area, you can put those books everywhere, right? And you've got built-in distribution and built-in interest, and then you use that book to parlay into working with you, right?
Well, not only that, but her voice is going to be different. Like her voice, the people that are listening to her, there's going to be people that would have never listened to me because I rubbed them wrong, or they don't resonate with me or my lifestyle, but they love her. And now all of a sudden the message that was lost, period, on these people are now finally being brought to them because she decided to do it in her own voice.
Right. When I would say this, like, maybe there's people that for most realtors, there's either people that you love working with, there's people you want to work with, or there's common questions that you just you feel like a broken record. You just keep repeating yourself over and over and over again. One of those three buckets, and maybe there's some overlap, is a really great book topic that will grow your business. And so I'm thinking about the people that you love working with. For my mom, she was like, I like working with first time home buyers, and I like working with people who are older, who are kind of like she just has a heart for that group of people. And it's like, hey, they're struggling through this process and not a lot of people want to help them. And I'm willing to and want to help them. So those are two angles. Now there's the flip side, which is, my mom's been top, gosh, I don't know, 1% or something in Oconee County, where I'm from in South Carolina, and everybody else is teams. And she's just the solo producer and just has like a low average sales price, but just slings houses.
Yeah.
My mom is incredible. But I've always told her, I'm like, Mom, you're killing yourself, selling these houses, 200,000 a pop. Like, you got to go up market. And so one thing I could think of is like the ultimate guide to buying on the lake in Oconee County. Okay. Right. And then now another option might be, the ultimate guide to upscale real estate in insert your city. Because let's say you're a realtor, it's like, man, I'd really love to go up market, but I'm not known as that yet. So it's a chicken or the egg. It's like, well, how do I sell up market homes or list up market homes if I'm not known as an up market realtor? Write the book on it.
Yeah, I wrote the book on luxury homes.
All of your target demographic. And there's a lot of simple ways to do that. You can now go to financial advisors. You can go to the YMCA. You can go to welcome centers. You can go to retirement homes and drop a stack of books and say, hey, if anyone comes in here and even thinks about this is yours and I want to make you look good, you just give them a copy of my book and on behalf of you, right? And now they're referring you business through your $5 business card. That's really a book.
Yeah.
I mean, I could keep talking about this for a long time. I feel like I've talked.
Yeah, no, I love it, man. This is great. Well, talk to me. You keep talking about dropping off books and print books, but one thing that's kind of hit the industry in the last 10 years is the different mediums that you can get a book and read a book, right? You've got Audible, you've got PDFs, you've got Kindles, you've got, and I personally still just love physically holding a book, but I don't know that everyone shares that. How has that impacted your industry, like you within the industry?
Yeah, I mean, there's way better margins on ebooks and audiobooks, and that's where, especially audio, it's the industry has shifted a lot, and there's a big rise in audiobooks. Now, people keep saying, "Hey, Kindle and ebooks are going to kill print books," and they've been saying that for what, a decade?
Since they came out,
a really long time, and they just don't. Like, I saw somebody poll the other day. I thought it was really interesting. It's like, hey, where do you read books? Do you listen to them? Do you read them in physical books or ebooks? And it was interesting going through all the responses because it's pretty one or the other, right? Some people, they're like 90% ebooks. And then there's a bunch of people who are like 0% ebooks. I know. So for me personally, I'm a big print physical book guy. Got 3 books on my desk right now, or I'm going to listen to the audiobook. Right. And so we teach people how to do that stuff all the time. And if your book is beyond your local market and if your book has a broad appeal, definitely do those things. I will say, if your main goal is to sell more houses and grow your real estate business, a lot of that's it might be helpful, but kind of a distraction. Like, I would lean pretty heavy. I'm a big like zig when everyone else is zagging.
Yeah.
Like, blue ocean, strategy kind of guy. And so I would go analog and I would get physical books, I would put them everywhere in your town. And
you're speaking my language, man.
Come in. Yeah.
That's how Real Producers was created, man. Everyone was going digital. And we're like, hey, we're going to cut through the crap. We're going to print magazines again. 2015.
Yeah.
Bringing it back.
I love it.
Well, so speaking about, the different reasons why you would write a book, you actually get into in your book different reasons or things you can do based on the book itself. And so remind me what they are again. Like if you're an author and speaker, you write a book so that you can further your speaking. And there's like 4 options for that. What are those?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're going to put me on the spot. It says the 4 paths to full-time as an author.
Oh, I didn't remember. I thought they were just in general, but yeah, like basically like if I want to speak, then I'm going to write a book that will.
Exactly.
Actually, it's what it was how you promote it, because you're going to change your strategy on whether or not you give them away, how you sell that based on what you want to do with the book. So what are just some of my options when I have the book?
Yeah. And I think you've successfully stalled long enough that I remember them. And so... So there's the full-time author that's like, hey, I want to publish books. I want to sell books. That's the hardest path. Mutual friend of ours, Hal Elrod, he's definitely done that. He comes from the Cutco world as well. But that's the hardest path. Then you've got the speaking author, and that's someone who wants to use a book to grow their speaking business. And maybe they want to be mostly a full-time speaker that also writes books. Then you've got the freelance author, and that's someone who maybe you're writing and publishing books, but also freelancing. And so maybe the book feeds into that, maybe it doesn't, but it's a path out of a full-time gig for most people and into kind of bridges the gap to a lot of those people want to be full-time authors, but the books aren't paying the bills yet. So they're freelancing with that. And then there's the business builder, which is kind of what we've talked about, which is, all right, I want this book to get more leads, sales, and referrals for my business. Yeah. So I'm going to write it about my business and I'm going to use it to promote my business. And that's,
well, what's funny is you would think 2 and 4 would be similar, right? So one of them is to legitimize my speaking by being a best-selling author. But then number 4 is to actually further the business because someone read the book and now we're connected, kind of like you and me. So like I'm actually connected to you. I want to use your services because I read your book, like what you have to say. Now I want to work with you. It feels like you almost have to decide between one of those two, but maybe you don't.
You don't necessarily have to decide. I think it's which is going to be the emphasis, right? Yeah. Some people are like, hey, I want to be a speaker. And that is my business. So then in that case, that's a pretty high overlap, right? Like, okay, you're in the business of building your speaking business. But I don't think you necessarily have to decide, like, I'm a speaker and I use my speaking to feed the business and I use my book to feed both. So I think that kind of probably plays to your point.
Well, you told me before the show that you spoke about 12 times this year. So that's not your main gig, unless they're just massive speaking gigs, which they might be. What is your journey through speaking now? Because I heard your TED Talk. It's phenomenal. You might have even had a couple. I just saw the one. But what is your journey now? Now that you've been, the success that you are within the book, but then also the company, how does speaking play into that for you personally?
Yeah, great question. Speaking is a mechanism to grow the business. I happen to enjoy speaking. I don't want to be on the road as a full-time speaker. But I learned a bunch of stuff from a friend of mine named Pete Vargas. I was doing a bunch of online webinars and he's like, hey, you got to get in person and start doing speaking gigs. And so back in 2018, I said yes to that. And I said, hey, I'm going to start speaking. I think this is going to be a serious way to grow the business. And that first year we did almost exactly $1 million in sales for the business from my speaking. It was like the last day of the year we passed $1 million mark. And that proved to me that, hey, I don't know if I got paid one speaking fee. I may have, but I don't remember if I got even one.
This is originally,
it was only 1 or 2. And I did, but in 2018. Yeah. And I did 24 speaking gigs that year. And I think that averaged about 40,000 per speaking gig, but it was I would go speak, I would give away my books and I would say, hey, here's a copy of the book, like in the back, just fill out the form, give us your contact information. If you're interested in working with us, let's sit down and talk about a plan for your book. Right. And so we would sign up all these clients. And so that was the start. And then now fast forward to today, we've got a speaking team of, I don't know, maybe 3 to 5 speakers, maybe more than that, where they'll, like last week or the week before, we spoke at 2 events and I didn't speak at any of them. And there were good sized events, a few hundred people, a couple thousand people. And so the speaking team will go out and speak at the smaller events, or sometimes the big ones where I just can't speak. Like I've got something else. And yeah, actually recently our biggest event that we've ever done was somebody on our speaking team spoke to 1,500 people.
Oh, wow.
Which is bigger than any gig that I've done. I think the most I've spoken to is like 1,100 or something. But so we use the speaking to grow the business, and they're always like, it's helpful standalone talks. And so it's not like, we're just going and pitching from stage and selling from stage. We don't typically do that. It's how we come in and add value to this conference and then give away a bunch of books, and then people will naturally
want to work with you when you do that. Exactly, it drives me nuts when people hard sell from stage, because not only does it not work, it actually hurts your business. Whereas if you're just likable and you have some cool stuff to say, people will naturally be like, hey, where do I find Chandler? And he wrote a book. I'm definitely buying that.
Right.
So I think you're doing that the way.
Yeah.
One thing I really appreciate about you, Chandler, is that you love to give credit to where his credit is due. I've heard you on a couple other podcasts, and I think your take on this, and I don't even know if I know you know this, but the way you said it was so good. You're just like, there's especially in our where we are at with like author speakers and everything like we've been talking about, there's this tendency to just say things slightly different and make it like our own content when it's just been
Yeah.
passed down
Yeah.
through generations of people, and we just refuse to give credit. I think your take on it, like why would you take credit when you could give credit? It just does so much
Mhm.
for you. Can you speak to that?
Yeah, oh, for sure. It's something I'm pretty passionate about because I've had a lot of my content just ripped off. Anybody who writes a book thinks they can teach people how to write a book, and they'll do it or learn it from us and me, and then not give any credit, which, quite frankly, just pisses me off. But I also, I think this is so common to your point, and I had mentors who really stressed this importance to me is when you learn from something from someone, just attribute it to them. And not only is it not a liability, it's an asset. And so anywhere that I can, which, I'm probably guilty of, there's things that you just like, you've known them for so long that you just forget that you learned them from some, but anywhere where I'm like, hey, I definitely learned that from someone, I want to attribute it to them. And I think a lot of times people don't want to because they feel like it'll make them lesser than. It's like, oh, well, if I say that I learned this from so and so, then they're up here and I'm down here. I found the opposite to be true. Is I want to be, when I work with somebody, I want to be their biggest success story because then they're going to promote me like crazy. And so that's what I think is hey, how can I be someone's biggest success story and keep giving them credit. And not only is it the right thing to do, but it's also a great business move because now I can't tell you how many people like Pete Vargas that I mentioned earlier. It's like, he's got a slide in his talk and he'll go speak at Grant Cardone's 10X or like massive stages. And I'll get pictures of me on the screen.
Dropping your name.
And me saying, hey, we just passed $1 million in sales from speaking the first year I've ever been a speaker. And it couldn't have happened without Pete Vargas.
Yeah.
Go work with him. And now that's like, he's talking about that all the time. And so I just think that's an example of giving credit and it'll pay itself forward.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, you said, I want to be your biggest success story. And I remember you telling the story one time of being the fly on the wall. Like you wanted to be a runner. You showed up to an event and it was one that you weren't invited to and didn't have enough money to actually attend it, but you talked your way into just being there and being a support and what that did for you. Can you tell that story?
Yeah. So that was my hustle early on is I think this is what you're referring to. I couldn't afford to go to conferences.
Yeah.
But I knew I wanted to be in the room with people who were smarter than me. I forget who said whose quote this is, but it's like, if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
You're in the wrong room. Yeah.
And so I wanted to be the dumbest person in the room. And I succeed at that pretty often. And so I'm like, hey, how did I just get in the room? And so I started reaching out to conference organizers. Hal Elrod was one of them. And I said, hey, I'll sweep the floors. I'll run the mics. I'll pick up speakers from the airport, like whatever you need me to do. I just want to be there and I'll work. But I work my way there, but I just want to be there. And people started saying yes to it.
Yeah.
And then now all of a sudden, I got the opportunity to be directly with the conference organizer, and also with the speakers. And
right.
It was kind of this wild thing because almost by the nature of that role, people saw me as if I was with the conference organizer, like I was
you're important.
Like with them.
Yeah.
and I think they also just saw me as like this underdog kid that was hustling.
Yeah.
And like literally running with the mic from person to person. And I'm like, run the mics. I'm going to take this real seriously.
Chandler, yeah.
But I think they saw that and they're like, man, I want to support this kid. I want to root for this kid. I want to help this kid however I can. So a lot of my early breaks and early promoters, like Hal Elrod was one of the first people that ever promoted us. And we were the first thing that he had ever promoted. It's because we first made that relationship and he saw he saw something in me when I think a lot of other people didn't. And so I'll forever owe him for that. But
that's just so smart though. Like saying, I will go and pick up the speakers from the airport. Of course you will. Cause then you get 30 minutes with the speakers where you wouldn't have normally. Like that's just that's work. That's working for you. Like that's just amazing. I love that. not to transition too abruptly, but you reminded me of something that I hope you have on hand, because I saw you talking about these gift boxes that you will use for your book. So it's not just when you're gifting a book, it's not just the book that they're getting, they get a couple other things. Do you have any of those boxes on hand?
I don't have them on
You
hand.
gave them all away.
No,
You've
I
been
gave
gifting
all
them.
away.
Well, talk about what you put in those boxes, because we've been doing those for, Joey Coleman wrote Never Lose Another Customer Again. And part of
Love
that
that book.
concept is like your first 90 days and like gifting. Like if you go to another mutual friend of ours, John Rulin, like giftology, like if you are doing that, like instead of giving your book, your box, which is super cool, by the way, because the box itself is shaped like a book. It actually looks like the book. And then you open it up and it's got some cool nuggets inside. What do you put in those boxes?
Yeah, so it depends on the context. Around the launch, what I did is there was a box and it was a book and a letter, and I think maybe a bookmark, but that was a part of the launch box. And I just had a letter from me that I wanted it to do a couple things. Number one, I wanted to, because people, this is just sounds kind of weird to say this, but like people in positions like us get sent books all the time. Like, let's just be straight up. And so it's, you need to stand out. It's like if someone wants, people were like, hey, can you shout out this book, or can you talk about the book on your podcast or whatever? And I wanted
so you originally did the boxes so that you could actually get more, people to actually read it and reviews. Like you were gifting it to people so that they would read. Yeah, it's an influencer box. Okay.
There's kind of two main ways. The first one I described, influencer box, but I wanted to make it to where there's no strings attached and there's specificity on how this could help them. So I reference like, hey, if you're thinking about writing a book, jump to this page. If you're already have a book and you want to use it to grow your business, jump to this page. So I gave like 3 to 4 use cases that I felt like people would say, oh, that's interesting. And I just want to get them to actually open the book. Because most of those books just get, thrown on a shelf or in the trash. And so that was the first thing. But then the second thing, I made it very clear that there was no obligation to share it. And also made it very clear how they could share it if they wanted to. And so, that was, I kind of like in the letter is like, hey, I have no expectation of you sharing this. And this is just like, I thought you might like it. And if you share it, cool. If you don't, totally cool. And I just made a joke of it. And I'm like, hey, I'm just sending you this because you're an important person in my life and I want you to have the book. If you want to support, here's 3 specific ways to do that. The easiest way is post a picture of you with the book on social. I think the second way was leave a review. The third way was like, hey, if you have a podcast or event, bring me in. And I'm like, if you want to do one of these, just type A, B, or C and text it to me. Here's my number, right? And so just like made it super simple for people to say yes, but then also no obligation. And then the other way that you might be referring to is we kind of have like a surprise and delight box that we send a lot of our customers.
Surprise and delight.
Yeah.
Tell me about that.
It's exactly as it sounds. Hopefully it surprises and delights them. But it's like a week or 2 after they sign up. They don't know that they're going to get it. And it'll have a copy of my book. It'll have, some stickers and stuff and some like a journey map of them going. We have our 8 milestones to writing and publishing. So it like we kind of gamify that. And so there's just some fun things there.
I'm literally taking notes. Like I have notes of like how I will interview somebody on this podcast, and that's over here. But then occasionally I'll get a guest and I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea. And so instead of taking notes there, I'm taking notes on my desk because I want to do that. I think about when I listen to podcasts, sometimes I'm at the gym and I bet I look like an idiot when I'm like in the middle of a lift and I literally stop mid lift because I have to take a note from the book or the podcast. I have a question for you, but I want to give you time to think about it because I didn't tell you I was going to ask this, but like when we have certain guests, it just make me think about things in a broader sense. And you've had this massive success in your business that I just kind of want to ask you, common traits of successful people that you've seen, because you have your own podcast, you've had your own successes. And one thing that I appreciate about you is you seem very opportunistic. You will speak when it makes sense. You write when it makes sense. Publish, you create a company, and you spend time on those things where it makes sense. And in this down market, which I know your mom's in real estate, so you've probably heard about this, or if you just turn on the TV, you've heard about this. The market's been down for the year. And I've said on this podcast before that the best leverage business is actually the most foolproof. People ask, what's the best business? The one that's not going to get hit the most in the downturn. It's the one that's most leveraged. Like if you're a realtor and the only option you have is to sell houses, then yeah, it might suck. It might hurt for a little while. But if you are a realtor who also is, good at social media, good at coaching, good at training, maybe a writer who can write a book, like you have all these different avenues by which then maybe you can spend a little bit more time on certain things that you can grow income pretty quickly while you're waiting on interest rates to come down or whatever. I know some people are going to hate that because they hear that. They're like, no, just work harder. But for you, that was a long-winded intro to this. Mm-hmm. For you, what are some of these common traits that you see of successful people?
Oh gosh, there's a lot. There's grit, there's hard work, there's determination. There's one that I don't think gets talked about enough is systems and process. It certainly wasn't taught to me in school or anything, but then I realized when you start scaling and if you want to scale beyond yourself, you need systems. You need systems and process and great people. Right. So how do you do those things? And so that's leverage, right? And that's why, I know probably nobody can see our video stream, but like I've got this thing over my shoulder. It's a picture on the wall that says leveraged impact. And I believe that a book is the ultimate piece of leverage. You do work once, you create that book goes on to impact thousands, tens of thousands, maybe millions of people. Right. And so I think that's the most successful people I've interviewed and interacted with. They look for leverage. How can I create this thing that will then keep going and keep creating revenue, profit, leverage in my business? And I would say probably the last one that I see pretty often on my podcast is just people aren't afraid to ask for what they want. And that's probably the hardest one for me personally, because it just feels weird. It just feels weird. I don't know. I'm saying, hey, like, get me on your podcast, or hey, can I come speak to this thing, or hey, we should work together. Even if you feel like, for me personally, it's like, even if I feel like that it would be helpful for someone, it just feels a little bit weird because I don't want them to see me as like, just talking to them to try to get them to work with us or whatever. But
yeah,
that's my own junk, because I think most successful people that I see, they're not afraid to ask for the review for their book.
Right.
I'm not afraid to text.
Well, I mean, in this case, you hopping on the podcast, like if you would ask, I actually asked you to be on the podcast, but if you would have come to me and asked me to be on the podcast, if you really believe you have value, then it's not you, pushing something down my throat. Is you believe you have something to offer, and I would then accept that. I think a lot of people get hung up on that. They get hung up on asking for the sale, asking for the order, asking for anything like that, because they see it as self-serving. But to be honest, if we feel like we have something worth giving, then yeah, I mean, I'm going to encourage it. We are unfortunately out of time, Chandler, but where can we find you? I noticed that I couldn't find you on Instagram. I could find selfpublishing.com. Is that by choice, or did I just not do a good job looking?
It's by choice. Yeah. I only have Facebook.
Well, I'll look for you on Facebook.
For me, a little bit of addictive personality, and I'm competitive. And so I don't know. I'm trying to limit distractions. And I know if I do something, I'm going to go all in with it. So I've limited the social media that I have. But the best place to find me personally would be on Facebook, or the company, the site is selfpublishing.com. If you go to selfpublishing.com/apply, if you want to chat with my team about your book and how we might be able to help, that's the best place to do it. And then the last thing I'd like to mention, and I just practice what I preach here, is I'd love to give everyone a free copy of my book. So an ebook and audiobook. We've got like a little ebook and audiobook bundle. So if you go to publishedbook.com/RP, so for real producers, publishedbook.com/RP. You can get a free copy of my book, and hopefully that'll be helpful for you.
Man, I can attest it is one of the best books I read this year. Now, granted, I am looking to write a book, so it was perfect for me. But it was I fanboy over it, man. It's a great book. It basically is a how-to guide that's entertaining, and you draw in stories from your personal life, which is how I write. And I really appreciate that about you. But Chandler, thanks for being on the show, man. Great insight.
Remington, thanks for having me.
All right. If Real Producers is not in your market and you want it to be, find us at realproducersmag.com, and either you can be that person or you can show us someone who can. We'll see you next time.